Good morning. Okay, we are up to the next Mishnah on Daf Tet Amud Aleph. Last week we spent our time talking about comparing one strange phrase in the Gemara to other places in the Shas where it appears, and this week we're going to kind of plumb into that a little more. So again, the Mishnah says and talk a lot about safek d'Rabbanan and chazakas and stuff like that. So the Mishnah says, "Ein chosheshin shema garara chulda mibayit labayit." We're not afraid. Once you did bedikat chametz, we're not afraid that your bedikat chametz gets undone because rodents move the chametz from one place to the other. We makom lamakom. Dimken michatzer lachatzer umeir leir ein ledavar sof. And I pointed out there was another Mishnah also someplace else that also talked about ein ledavar sof in the Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah in Yoma. So in other words, we can't worry about this too much. Because otherwise you'd be in serious trouble. Now, if I ask you initially when you read this Mishnah what you would say, so I think the Gemara seems to be indicating that the issue of bedikat chametz is kind of like a pretty serious issue, that we would have a havamina that you would be choshesh forever, right? Which seems to indicate, and we'll come back to this in a few minutes, that somehow the issue of bedikat chametz is a pretty serious issue. Right, we've spent a lot of time talking about how serious it is. The Yisr Zman, is this only a Durabanan? Is there Bitul? Is there not Bitul? All that being said, let me just take it. All that being said, the Mishnah seems to take it seriously. But either way, the Gemara goes to a different direction altogether, and then gives two answers, and it's each of those answers that is relevant for us today. So the Gemara says, "Taima delo chazina deshaka." Yeah, you're right. You don't have to worry that a rodent came along and took, undid your bedikat chametz, if you will, or regenerated a chiyuv of bedikat chametz, as long as you didn't see the animal walk into your house with a piece of bread in its mouth. But if you did see a rodent walking into your house after you did bedikat chametz with chametz in its mouth, you'd have to do bedika again. Why don't we say maybe it just ate it, right? Milo tnan. After all, we have a model for this. Something that's a little. It makes it a little uncomfortable, but nonetheless, medurat from lashon dira, right? Houses of nachrim are tmeim. A kohen can't just move in there, right? Why not? How much time do you need? We talked about the entire bedika chametz. There's another bedika also, the bedika of a non-Jewish house. Arba'im yom, even if the guy doesn't have a wife, right? Again, what are we talking about here? We're assuming that a non-Jewish woman might have had a miscarriage in an early stage, right? Within the first 40 days, after 40 days, and bury the baby inside the house, and therefore the house would be tamei. We raised the question last time: is this tumat ohel? Is this tumat maga? Is there some middle stage? Usually, when we talk about goyim not being the tamei bohel, you remember we talked about the Rashash. For those who weren't here, very quickly, the famous Rashash, that even though goyim are not tamei bohel, right? A kohen can go into a non-Jewish cemetery, but there's two types of ohel. There's being in the cemetery with the non-Jewish body. That's not a problem. Right? Adam ki amud ba'oel, and we say there's difference between Adam and Ha'adam, but a non-Jew is not included in that. And when the Jew himself is ma'ahil, when the Jew stands over the body, then he becomes the ohel. That might be different, right? That was a issue that we brought up last time. But either way, the assumption is that should there be a nefel in the house, a nefel meaning a miscarriage in the house, and should the baby have been buried inside the house, and should the baby be over 30 days, and maybe mitame, whatever it is, that in fact would be a problem, even if there's not a woman there. Right? But says the Gemara there that even though we're generally concerned for tuma in a non-Jewish home, if a rodent or a chazir or a pig can be in there, because we assume that the chulda, right? I was going to use a nicer word. Got rid of it. Okay, thank you. Right. So how come in our case? Right, we have an inference that you don't have to worry that a chulda did it, but if you saw, right, the inference, you don't have to worry if you didn't see anything, but if you saw something, then in fact you probably have to worry. That's the inference. That seems to contradict the issue about the bite of the nocharim. So we have two answers. We're going to deal with them out of order today. Okay, Amar Rabbi Zera, because Rabbi Zera is a more technical answer. Lo kasha habe basar. Oh, in basar you can be certain, right? When you're talking about flesh, then you can be certain that the animal ate it. Ha belechem. Basar lo mishayro. In basar, the animal wouldn't leave over anything. The lechem, so there's some crumbs, and the animal leaves it over, and therefore you have a responsibility to do bedikat chametz in the inference from our Mishnah. Right? Our Mishnah talks about if you didn't see the animal walking in. Once you saw the animal, the inference is once you saw the animal walking in, you'd have to go check. Why in the rodent do you not have to check when it comes to the medura of it? Because that's basar and this is lechem. That's not a fundamental difference. Rava's chidush is much more dramatic, and that's why I'm interested in Rava. I'm a Rava high mind. What are you talking about? Bishlam hatam, a more haya, a more lo haya. In other words, we can ask the question: was there an afil there at all? And even if there was an afil there, maybe it ain't it, right? That's what we call safek. But in other words, basically, we can undermine the basic notion that there was a safek. But in our case, when we see the rodent walking in with the bread in its mouth, you don't have to differentiate between bread and flesh. We know the bread was there. Then we don't even know the nafel was there. We're just speculating the nafel was there, right? We're saying maybe, right? Right? Who says it ain't? Havi safek uvadai. This case becomes a safek and a vadai. Vein safek motzimi de vadai. And a safek, right, that maybe the animal ate it, doesn't get rid of a vada, that the bread was actually there, right? Now this phrase, as I mentioned last time, caused Rav Lichtenstein a lot of anguish. He didn't like this phrase, safek and vada. Last time what we did is we tried to connect it to two other places where the same in safek mitzvah motzimi de vadai comes up. We talked about the breaking of the shechting of the animal, where it was maybe the or and maybe the atzamah. And we talked about a Yerusha case, but he said Rav Lichtenstein, throughout his whole article about this, he just doesn't like this phrase. He says, why doesn't the Gemara talk about rov and chazaka and general principles? And he really, at the end of the article, he kind of throws up his hands and he says, I still don't get it. This sugya is really hard to fathom. And he goes on in this sugya, and we're not going to do that for our purposes. The two main distinctions to be aware of, one of which we raised, I think maybe even both of which we raised last week. The first one is the Tosfot. Again, this is kind of review, but just to mention it, the Tosfot raises the question, hey, shouldn't we have another principle here of safek tamei b'reshut harabim, tamei safek tamei b'reshut yachid tahor? And he says, Tosfot says, an outgrowth of that, vim tomar. This is the first Tosfot on the page. Hay medurat avad kochavim b'reshut hayachid. Isn't a medurat avad kochavim b'reshut hayachid? Right, they're at their private home. V'tam masechet Tara, we have a mission that says, kol makom shteichol arbot sveikot v'sveikei sveikot b'reshut hayachid tamei. Anytime you can raise a safek, we always in reshut hayachid. In other words, this is an outgrowth of safek tum reshut hayachid tamei, right? Or it's not right. It's any time you have sveikot in reshut hayachid. Reshut hayachid is an individual place, and we just generally assume the more any safek you have, we're going to just, right? We're going to pass on the chumrah exactly. Tosfot in the second answer. I'm not interested in the first answer today. In the first answer, Tosfot, in the second answer, Tosfot says inami. Emer achalte adif mishar sveikot. That's already a very lumdish thing, right? The fact that the animal, not the animal, the fact that the animal might have eaten the body is more than a regular suffix. Why? The suffix haragilhu, the karov levadai, the teda dafilu midi van. That's all I need, right? Karov levadai. He says there's two types of sveikot. There's 50-50. That's what we call a suffix ha shakul. Okay, and then there's a suffix haragil. A suffix haragil is there's a chance, most likely this happened. Says Tosfot, when we talk about the animal eating the chametz, or we talk about the animal eating the body, that's according to Rava, that's a suffix haragil. It's more. There's an 80% chance. It's not right. He says the word karov levada. It's an 80%, 90% chance. Right? That's already very significant that the animal ate it. And yet what? Right? And yet what happens? What do we say? Right? It's the animal. There's a good chance the animal ate it, and yet still, when it comes to chametz, we're going to say no. Right? You understand what I'm saying? We're going to say we still have to do bedikat chametz. The question is, why would that be?
Wait, so they're saying that the chuda, our Pesach chuda is also
a good chance? Both cases. That's why again, this for Rav Lichtenstein is helpful because this already, to partially answer this question at least, which explains why the Gemara doesn't use regular Rav and Chazaka discussions. Rav and Chazaka is when you have 50-50. But this is already 90-10. It's 90 that it ate it, and yet still in bedikat chametz, we're going to make you search again. Right? So again, just to remind you, we have one, right? Maybe because bedikat chametz is unique, because it's a zman. Maybe bedikat chametz is unique because it's all nitkan ala safek, right? I think the Rav quotes someone here that says that right. The whole thing was we don't even know, right? But whatever you're going to say, but this raises a general question of why should this be? In other words, we can say bedikat chametz is unique, but still the question is why, when it's 90%, right? Are we going to be machmir? So again, this is an important text, and just in terms of marginalizing the case completely, right? Or maybe not marginalizing, that's the right word, maybe underscoring how unique this case is. Even when you have 90%, when it comes to bedikat chametz, you're going to still require you to check. On the other hand, right, you might, right, or there's another parameter in which to isolate this case from other cases to ask ourselves, how serious do we take this case, right? According to Rav, again, what's Rav's chiddush? Rav's chiddush is there's a fundamental difference between it's not the difference between eating flesh and eating bread. Bread you leave over, flesh you don't eat over. That's Rav, right? That's a Metzias difference, Rabbi Zera, right?
Well,
bread,
because you saw the chulda come with bread.
Right. So once you saw the chulda come with your bread in the mouth, what is that? So let's talk it out for a minute.
Not a safek.
The
safek is only now.
It's even when you have safek haragil, is even though it's 90% that it ate it, that can't possibly do what? Undermine the metziu that you saw, the chazaka that there's bread there. Mm-hmm. Whereas when we say rov v'chazaka ruba adif, let's say, when you use those regular terminology, that's where when you have a clash, right? Between the rov and the chazaka. But here you don't have a clash. You have a metziu. I like your word, right? There's a metziu, there was bread there. You saw the animal walking in with the bread, right? So I don't even care if there's a 90% chance that it ate it. It can't undermine the fact there was bread there, right? You understand? That's the way to, it's the metziut is kovei 100%, right? This is a principle of not, we're trying to evaluate which one is better, rov, chazaka, whatever, all those terminology. There's a metziut, and against the metziut, we have a 90% chance. That doesn't help us. In other words, if chazaka and rov are basically percentages, right? Status quo, not status quo, whatever. But here we have a metziut. That's a whole different category altogether. I like your explanation.
And another way of putting this is 100% chance that there was Isur there for sure. Whereas when we think about rov and chazaka, like for example, a piece of meat in a city where there are different butchers, you don't have for sure Isur there. You have something that you have to determine what is the status of this. Here we don't have to determine the status of the bread. We know the bread is chametz.
Right. Okay, Rav Lichlin also made a third distinction, right? Not this metziut, not that, right? Again, what's the word you want to use to say it? Like,
it's vadayis.
That's right. Vadayis, right. Something. He said, all these principles are not the world of Rov and Chazaka. I'm raising this a little earlier than I thought I would, but he said, here we're not trying to determine what was. We have a speculation about what might have been. Whereas Rov and Chazaka is, we know that there was, we'll see another case in just a minute, there's definitely meat there, right? There's definitely 10 pieces of meat, and there's 9 stores that are kosher and 1 store is not kosher, something like that, right? You remember those cases, right? Here, we're creating in our minds the case, maybe the animal ate it, maybe the animal didn't. That might be much less of a speculation, even if there's a 90% chance that the animal ate it, but it's not something we know existed. Mm-hmm. Or it's a speculation. Could the animal have eaten it or not? So it's all speculative. It's a hashara. So because of that, maybe it's like a whole different category than the standard cases of Rov and Chazaka. Again, the idea is to try to figure out. It's a made-up story. Exactly.
Sorry, what's that?
Sorry, Seth, you're not muted.
Zoe,
yeah. If you were trying to speak, so just tell me. Were you trying to say something to me?
Oh, sorry. No, sorry.
Okay, fine. Okay, so I'm muting you again. Or you can mute yourself. Okay, so again, we're trying to isolate this case. So again, we have a phrase here that appears in a couple of other places. Why not? So Tosfos says, first of all, I want you to know, Tosfos ups the ante. He says, this isn't a regular 50-50. This is a 90-10. And yet still we're saying that. Mm-hmm. So that ups the ante, right? So we're trying to down the ante either by saying it's speculative, or Jeff has his theory, which is that there's a metziut here that we have to contend with. Tosfos says, I have to, it's impossible to explain this, basically. It's impossible for me to explain this on a standard way to say that you'd have to do bedikat chametz again. It's ridiculous. So Tosfos, the next Tosfos says, Kape chametz hamaylo ati safek u'matzim midei vadai bedika durabanan demidoraita bebitul ba'al masavi. It says Tosfos, what kind of craziness is this? This should be a safek durabanan. Forget about all your games. There's a metziut here. We saw the animal walking with the bread. right? Or that it's only based on a hashara. Tosfos says, I understand it's all derabanan. Before we get to any of those things, it shouldn't be just a safek derabanan. I don't. As soon as you raise any safek, forget about 90%. For sure, 90%. It's a safek derabanan. Safek derabanan l'kula. So Tosfos says something very dramatic. Tosfos says, in order to get to this whole discussion, I have to tell you, Omer Ridim, I need an ari b'shalot bitlu dafti b'adei doraita. Tosfos says, oh yeah, you're right. This is a safek doraita.
Because you didn't do bittul.
Because you didn't do bitul. Had you done bitul, it would only be a durabanan, and then for sure, says Tosfos,
But if you still find
you wouldn't have to do it.
Why don't you just do the bittul?
Tosfos says you saw the animal walk in, and you haven't done bitul yet. Because if you did bitul, then the bedikat drops down to durabanan. You remember the first Rashi Tosfos? Bedikas doraita. Tosfos says you have bedikas doraita, but only if you can do bitul. And then we have the Rashi on Daftalin. So Tosfos says you haven't done bitul. And therefore, this ups the ante to a safek doraita. Once it's safek doraita, then I can talk about all these terms. And this, but if it was actually a durabanan, there'd be nothing to talk about.
Even if it's not there right there, you have the ability to do bika. Why not just do bittul?
As opposed to,
So the closest point I understand.
that's a good question. The answer is very simple because the rabbis made you do bedika.
Ah.
In other words, even if you do bitul, you're still gonna have to do bedika because it's like you started again. It's a restart. Do bitul now. The question is, if you had done bitul before, then this safek would look different. Correct. Right. Okay. So this is all the questions of Rov and Chazaka. Okay, and the question of whether this case is different. I'm going to skip the Mishnah Mike about now. It's not so important to me right now for our discussion. Assuming that for a moment, which is what we've assumed all year, that this is Durabanan, is there any reason to think that B'chol Zon, even in a Durabanan, we would be able to, entertain the notion that still bedikat chametz, you have to go ahead and do it again. In other words, again, Tosfos marginalizes this case in order to get to the whole discussion of something midei vandai. Tosfos says there's no way. So Tosfos says qualify the case in two ways, right? First, he upped the ante, and then he lowered the ante a little. Right? What do I mean? He upped the ante. First, he upped the ante by saying this safek is a 90% safek that the animal ate it, and yet still it's a problem. And Tosfos says, but the only reason it's a problem is because it's a doraita, it's not a durabana. Were it to be a durabanan and a chinam be safek durabanan l'kula. Okay. The question is, could we even entertain the notion that in a durabanan clashing with a chazaka, which again, what do you mean chazaka? It's right now we saw the mitziyut, as you called it. You saw the animal walking with bread, even though it's only durabanan, and even if it's 90% that the animal ate it, we'd still require you to do it on a durabanan level. That's the interesting question here. Could a safek durabanan somehow undermine a cheskad doraita? Right. That's the question, at least Nahavamina. So here we do have a text, a very, very fascinating text that I chose to do because it's it's relevant and people have this all the time. Unfortunately, we have this in our lives too much. Okay, so there's a Gemara in Brachot that says, Amar Rav Yehuda, safek kara kriyat shema, safek lo kara. Okay, now how does this happen? I don't know. It's Shavuos morning and you wake up and you're in Emet V'Yatziv and you're like, what did I just do? Right? Eino chozer v'koreh. This is a little surprising. Rav Yehuda's din, right? For many years ago, I don't know if Bigman is here for Shabbos, and he gave a shir about this Gemara. But not our topic right now. So if you're not sure you said Kriyat Shema, you don't say Kriyat Shema again. Safek Amar Emet V'Yatziv, Safek Lo Amar. I know this is going to surprise you. Choser V'Omer Emet V'Yatziv. Okay, no, it's the opposite of what me and you would have thought, for sure. Right? You would have thought Kriyat Shema. What do you mean? That's Doraita, right? Emet V'Yatziv. What is that? Right. So my time, huh?
An issue of Shem Hashem Lashav or something.
Right, we'll get to that. Okay, so what my time, huh? Says the Gemara, Kriyat Shema Durabanan. Med V'Yatziv Doraita. Okay, that's shocking. We didn't know that. Okay, that Gemara seems to adopt our principle, right? This is just what? This is the first time in Shas you have it. Safek Durabanan L'Kula, Safek Doraita L'Chomra. Right? You with me? Mm-hmm. Rabbi Lezer Amar, Safek Kara Kriyat Shema, Safek Lo Kara. If you're not sure whether you read Kriyat Shema, Choser v'Korei Kriyat Shema. But Safek Hitpalel, Safek Lo Hitpalel, Eino Choser Hitpalel. That's the Amida. So if you're not sure you daven, you don't go back and daven. If you're not sure you said Kriyat Shema, you just go back and say Kriyat Shema. And then Rabbi Yochanan says a famous line, Vavai Hitpalel Adam Kol Hayom Kulo. Right? Or he says, ostensibly, right? It would be good if everybody davened all day. This is the source. Right, they should be davening all day. which ostensibly in the context of the Gemara. No. Sheet palel. You should daven all day. Because you should daven all day. That's what he meant. That a person would have the power to daven all day, the energy. So ostensibly Rabbi Yochanan is saying is, of course you can go back and daven. You can daven anytime you want. You should be davening all the time. Okay, I'm not so interested in Rabbi Yochanan. I'm much more interested in Rabbi Lazar. Right? And what's the machloket? So if Rabbi Lazar says safek kar kriyat shema, safek lo kara, chozer v'korei kriyat shema, but safek mitpalel, safek lo mitpalel, no chozer mitpalel.
So assuming one's darbana, one's.
So that's a good question. So Rashi there says what? In the first Dibur HaMatchil, Emet v'yatziv doraita, Rashi says, I'll tell you why Emet v'yatziv is doraita, because maskir ba'yitziat Mitzrayim. The chiyuv doraita, dichtiv lamanti scored yom tzeicha mi'eretz Mitzrayim, kol yemei chayecha, right? Kriyat Shema, again, doesn't have an explicit mention of Yitziat Mitzrayim, does it?
That's a lot of things in it. Correct.
But Emet v'yatziv does, right? What do we say in Mitzrayim? Galtanu Hashem Elokeinu beit avadim ditanu, right? Kein kol b'charei marakta. So actually, in Emet v'yatziv, you're being yotzei a chiyuv doraita.
Okay.
So that becomes a safek doraita.
There's no doraita around Kriyat Shema.
So that's a machloket, as we know, whether it's the first pasuk or the first pasuk and the first line, or the first pasuk, the first paragraph, or the first pasuk, the first paragraph, and the second paragraph, or all of them.
What is Rabbi Huda saying? Is he saying eno chayav lachzor b'likro, or you can't? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You can't. It's Talmud.
Right. It doesn't mean right. No. Right. Again, you could do it Talmud. You don't know chayav. Right. What about Rebbe Lazar? Rebbe Lazar who believes safek kara kriyat shema, safek lo kara chozer v'koreh. Right. So he says, Rashi says, I'll tell you why. Kasavar kriyat shema doraita. Okay. So he believes that the level just drops down. Right. In other words, one guy says Kriyat Shema is D'Rabbanan because it doesn't have Yitziat Mitzrayim. According to Rashi's reading, Kriyat Shema is D'Rabbanan because it doesn't have Yitziat Mitzrayim. And Emet v'yatziv is D'Oraita because it has Yitziat Mitzrayim. Rabbi Lazar says, no, Kriyat Shema is D'Oraita, at least some part of it. We don't know how much of it. Let's just assume he says all three parts of it. Or some people say, like I said, 2 or 1 or just the first line. And Tefillah, well, Tefillah will be interesting, right? Then Tefillah becomes D'Rabbanan in Rashi's reading. Right? Machlok at Rashi, Rambam and Ramban, whether Tefillah is D'Oraita D'Rabbanan, you remember? Right? The Ramban says, no, you don't remember that? Okay, I'll remind you very quickly. This is the Rav's famous thing. So the Rambam says that Tefillah is who says which one? Yeah. The Ramban says that Tefillah is D'Oraita only by Eitzara. Only if you're totally struggling. The Rambam holds that Tefillah at least one time a day is D'Oraita. So most people think that the Rambam holds D'Oraita and the Ramban holds D'Rabbanan. But the Rav said, right, no, you misunderstood, right? It's this is like the Rav at his best, right? You misunderstood. You know this, Rav, please? Right? It's not that the one holds D'Oraita, one holds D'Rabbanan. They both hold that Tefillah is only D'Rabbanan, and they both hold that Tefillah b'Eit Sarah is D'Oraita. It's just that the Rambam thinks that every day is an Eit Sarah. And only an existentialist could say that, right? So that was the Rav's interpretation of that. But here you have an explicit, again, according to Rashi, I think it's pretty clear that according to Rabbi Lazar, Tefillah is only D'Rabbanan. Okay? But, here's the big but. And this is why it becomes to be very, very important for us, because you don't have a chazaka here, yet so far. The Pri Megadim says something in this context that becomes extremely valuable for our discussion about chametz. Okay, look what he says. Again, the Pri Megadim in one of his commentaries is called the Mishpatzot Zahav on the Shulchan Aruch, and he's a little cryptic, but I tried to underline the important part, so don't get lost too much in the Rashi Tevot or the references to all sorts of things. So he starts off Choser. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins Safekim Kara Kriyat Shema. I don't know if you know this. Choser v'korim v'varech lefanei lachareh. Aval im yadash shekara, aval mesugim berachov lefanei lachareh. Eno choser v'varech. So he paskin the Kriyat Shema is D'Oraita ostensibly, and you go back and say it again. So says the Pri Megadim, Ayin Tas. For Hine, Safek Torah, since it's a biblical Safek, right? Remember, right? Tosfot said, bedikat chametz is a biblical Safek, right? You didn't do bitul, right? You remember that? That's important for us. So it says, Safek Torah, Kaimalan, then mevarchin aleh. In other words, if you forgot, if you're not sure, if you did a Safek Torah or not, so you don't make a birchat mitzvah, right? Okay, that's not so important to us. Right? Even if you do a brit milah for an androgynous, you're not going to say a bracha. Very interesting, but not for us. With dmai mefurash, dmai, which is also safek d'oraita. So even if you can be mafresh on Shabbat, you don't make a bracha. That's not important. Certainly the Shulchan Aruch, by getting to this conclusion, believes, drum roll please, listen to what he says. Yesh chiluk bein im mechuyav klal hamitzuveh oseh b'lo bracha ubein, right, there is going to be a distinction between if you're chayav in the bracha, right? Im mechuyav klal hamit, im mechuyav bein im klal hamitzvah, right? Hamitzvah.
You certainly have to do this.
If you certainly have to do this, right, then you would do it without a bracha. Ubein hecha de mechuyav ela she'ino yodea im asa.
Not sure if you're chayav, you're not sure if you did it.
Correct.
Okay.
You're not sure if you're chayav in the mitzvah, or you're not sure if you did the mitzvah. It seems to me, this is the big distinction he makes. This is totally fascinating. Right, again, you're not sure if you're chayav, or you're not sure if you did it already. Those are two different sveikot. You see those two different sveikot? He said, it seems to me, again, he's talking about the bracha issue, but now he comes up with this big distinction. If you know you're chayav, but you're just not sure if you did it, that engenders a chazaka that you didn't do it. Because you started off, when you woke up this morning, you knew you were chayav. Now the question is, right, did you do it or not? So we can assume that when you woke up this morning, you have what's called a chazaka mi'ikara. You have a status quo. What's the status quo when you woke up this morning? You haven't done it yet. As opposed to, if you're not sure that you're chayav, then what? When you woke up this morning, nothing. There's no chazaka that was created. That's a brilliant, right? It's a very clever distinction, right? He says there's different types of sveikot. Safek you're chayav, or safek did you do it already? Right? Notice again, in both cases, you have a safek, should I do it now? But they're for different reasons. Was I ever chayav, or did I do it already? Okay? So again, I'm going to read it again. So I didn't get it as well when I was referring as now. So when you get up in the morning, when it comes to Kriyat Shema, right, that's a case of what? Again, you're not sure you said it or not. Right. There's a certain chiyuv, but there's a chazaka that you haven't said it yet. So now, right, when you wake up 25 minutes later in shul with your tefillin on, and you say, shoot, did I say Kriyat Shema or not? And you're not sure. Since you're not sure, what do? We take you back to the first, where you were before. Where were you before? You were chayav to say it. And therefore we make you go ahead and say it again, right? Right? So I'm continuing the next one. Ain't safek motzi midei vadai. There's that phrase again. The safek of maybe you did say it will not get you out of the vadai of what? Of the chazaka mi'ikar, right? Well, the Zamartan Kidmai, the Rav Shan, okay, then he gets to the halaf achi, hayam mefarech. Then he's into the bracha, the ishkala gotu. Right? Okay. Miu bebracha lechud ein chozer mevarech. Right? Bebracha lechud ein den chozer mevarech. Tafagav deishkach chazaka. Vafilu man damar biyoredea safek derabanan im chazaka lechumra. Hacha ika negda lo tisa. He says, oh, but in some cases, if you're going to use Shem Hashem, then there's a counter pressure to doing it. That chazaka mi'ikara exists. Again, he's talking about a different context, about whether you say a brachat mitzvah or not. But again, you understand, he says, you're not going to say he's talking about brachat kriyat shema. So he says, sorry, not brachat mitzvah, brachat kriyat shema. He says, you're not going to go back and say the brachat kriyat shema. After all, you have the same chazaka of mi'ikara, right? You woke up this morning, you also chayv brachat kriyat shema. Why are you not going to do it? Because there's a counter pressure. What's the counter pressure? Shem Hashem.
Wait a minute.
So in Kriyat Shema,
wait, you wouldn't want to say Kriyat Shema twice?
No, Kriyat Shema is you'll say again.
Yeah.
But Birchat Kriyat Shema you won't, because there's no problem of saying Shem Hashem and Kriyat Shema because you're just leaning.
Yeah.
Right. So again, but what's the critical distinction for us is the one that says that at least in positive mitzvot, you can have a distinction between I'm not sure if I did it, and I'm sure I did it. I'm not sure if I was chayiv in it. How is that, right? You see that distinction? Now, if we apply that distinction to our discussion, then what happens in bedikat chametz? So now you have to think about it. What happened? I did bedikat chametz. I know I did bedikat chametz. What don't I know?
Whether there's chametz.
If I'm chayav, and again, because I saw the animal walk in with the thing. But maybe I can undo that because why? Because maybe it ate it. Right? You understand? So that might be, right? So we don't have to necessarily go down, right, Tosfos's way and say, 1 second, let me just try to see why this is right. So why is this so important to me? Why is this is a valuable distinction? Because Tosfot wants to say that this must be doraita. The only reason we'd entertain the notion of making you do bedikat chametz again is because it's a safek doraita, right? But maybe we could entertain the notion of you doing maybe you could say it, I guess, in both directions, but I'll say it in this way. Maybe we can entertain the notion of saying it in the safek dorabanan as well, because why? Maybe this, again, on one hand, there's more reason to think like I did bedikat chametz already. The question is, am I chayiv again? Or maybe you could say I didn't do bedikat chametz at all at this point. Once I saw the chulda go in, it's like I didn't do bedikat chametz again, right? It's like I have to start again, right? No, even if it's the rabbanon, sometimes, right? No, what? Let me take a step back. What's the Pri Megadim's advantage? She doesn't have to go down Rashi's path. What did Rashi say in Rebbe Lazar? Right? Rebbe Lazar said, Kriyat Shema, you go back and say it again, right? Rashi says, I'll tell you why, because Kriyat Shema is doraita. The Pri Megadim says, no, I'll tell you why, because you had a chazaka mi'ikara. Right? You follow? You don't have to say like, sorry, I skipped that point. I skipped that in the development of the argument. Right? You follow what the Pri Megadim says? That's what he says. He says, I don't have to go down Rashi's path and say that Rebbe Lazar believes you have to repeat Kriyat Shema again. Again, we have Tanakama, you don't have to repeat Kriyat Shema again. It's only the Rabbanan. I mean, Viatzi is doraita. Rebbe Lazar, you have to repeat Kriyat Shema again because Kriyat Shema is doraita. Right? That's what Rashi said. Right? Kriyat Shema doraiti. Pri Megadim says, no, you have to repeat Kriyat Shema again. Why? Because he had a chazaka mi'ikar. Right? It was the chazaka when he woke up this morning was he didn't say it. This is not like there's a tour from the chi, right? There's a chazaka mi'ikar. So maybe in our case also, right? It's even that. So again, the Pri Megadim's thing is even in the Durabanan, sometimes a safek requires you to do something. Yafeh. So in our case also, again, you could go down what Dov said before, right? Dov and I wanted to say originally in the argument, right? Oh, maybe you did bedikat chametz here already, and therefore you're putter. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe the fact that you saw a chulda go in undermines your bedikat chametz to the extent that what do we know now? Right, you're chayiv again. Once you're chayiv again, even if it's a derabanan, you have to do bedikat chametz again. This is not a regular case of rov and chazaka and whatever. This is the chulda walked in, restart. Shama achla. Hey, then why would you ever do bedikat chametz? That's the key line. You understand? What? Right. No, but
Only if you don't see it.
but once you saw a chulda, but what's the inference? That's as long as you didn't see it. Once you did something in the davar so. But here we're saying you didn't do anything. Once I saw a chulda go in, exactly, it's a total reset. So then you don't have to go down this. Oh, it's a doraita, and whatever. You can actually say there's something unique. There's something totally unique about bedikat chametz. Again, maybe playing off of some of the terms we've talked about before. That it's all nitkan on a safek. It's your zman, whatever it is. But somehow the chulda walking in with the thing again within Rava, right? Within Rava, not within Rabbi Zeir, not within the difference between the flesh and the bread. Right, within Rava that says, what do you mean? You saw him walking with it, right? So you don't have to say it's necessarily do right. You don't have to create right. What did Tosfot do? Raise the threshold very, very high, right? You didn't do bitul, and that's why it's a safek doraita. And even though it's a safek sheno ragil, right? A safek ragil, in other words, it's 90%. We still are machmir in this case. No. It could be it's durabanan, but sometimes in durabanan there's a reset, right? It gets you to a place like this Pri Megadim. It gets you to a place where you have to do it again, right? You have to do it again. Okay, that's all. An alternative explanation of that. Okay, finally we get to the din of Rabbi Zeira. What's Rabbi Zeira's din? Just one distinction that's important. I'm surprised you didn't jump on this. I want you to note that the Pri Megadim is talking about in positive mitzvah, right? He's talking about like mitzvah laseh. Our bedikat chametz is essentially built on a lotas in some way or another, right? Okay, but having said that, okay. What did Rabbi Zeira say? Rabbi Zeira said, I can be relatively certain that in flesh that the animal ate it, but in bread the animal left it over. Okay, yeah. What's the assumption of Rabbi Zera? What if I could be certain that the animal ate all the bread?
No problem.
Then they wouldn't have a problem, right? We all agree to that, right? The problem, what's that?
Yeah.
Right. The problem with this is the following. There's another Gemara, which I think we read once, but we'll read it again. On Daf Chet, that says Rava's statement. This is again Rava, so you can tell me Rava doesn't agree with Rabbi Zera. I'm okay with that, but Rava's statement was Chatzer ena tzricha bedika, mipnei sha'orvin mitzuyin sham. Okay, or it's you don't need to check when you do bedikat chametz. You don't need to check outside because
I'll take care of it.
the birds take care of it. Uh-oh, that's a problem. What should Rava have said? Only if we no, the birds take care of it, right? Whereas if we're going to take the inference from Rabbi Zera, right? He says, flesh, we know they eat. Bread, we don't know they eat. It doesn't, right? Which sounds like if we knew they eat it, it'll be fine, right? But chuldas and birds.
Yeah.
Why?
One of them eats on the spot, or they have time to eat on the spot, or they have teams that eat on the spot, and the other one doesn't. Maybe the other one buries it.
Oh, so then you're saying it could be. I was going to say a little more, whatever. It could be maybe an orev is more of like an organic part of the chatzer, like orvim come and go as they want. A chulda, I don't know. Like every time I see a chulda, I chase it away. I don't know. The cats eat it. I don't know. Okay, maybe, but again, that's the problem. Why does this become relevant for us, or important for us, or super important for us? Because the question is, this is the last question we're going to deal with this year. Having talked about bedikat chametz, we have to ask ourselves, when don't we do bedikat chametz? Like when don't we have to? Not in terms of time. We talked about that, your dalit, etc. But what do we all do? We all clean our house before. So do we have to do bedikat chametz again? Right? Or isn't that basically chatzir that we know is baduk? Isn't that the Gemara Daf Chet? Just like my outside is clear because I know the Orvim came, so my inside is clear because I know my housekeeper came and cleaned up, or I cleaned up in the days before Pesach, because we start our Pesach cleaning, around now. So, right? Shavuos is over. So that's an important question. In other words, when we talk about bedikat chametz and the source for the chiyuv and the depth of the chiyuv, we also have to ask ourselves the scope. In other words, how far do we have to go in this thing? Not in terms of Horinu Stakim, but also what about if we check before? Do we have to keep checking? So the Ravan, who's one of the Rishonim, has asked this question exactly. He says as follows: Apparently, the Ravan's wife was also getting him in the action like days before, right? And he says, people who happen to sweep their houses or their roofs on the 12th or 13th of Nisan, v'im kibudan, at the time when they're sweeping, bodkino tomi chametz, u'mishamrim shelo lachnis sham shum chametz. So it's shuv chametz. So this is our Mishnah, right? Ein chosheshin, right? Afal pi chen shrechin levodkan or yudalad b'shasha bodkin b'makom asher tiltalu sham chametz arata. Sorry, gentlemen, you have to go back and do bedikat chametz again, according to the Ravan. Okay. Now this is very obvious what he holds. He believes there's an independent chiyuv on Yodal to do bedikat chametz. I think there's no other way to get around it. And then he says, I found a proof. This is a Gemara we've quoted before. I think I've done a pretty good job of doing resuscitating all these Gemaras in the last year. Okay? The Yerushalmi, which we quoted in the first year, and then we quoted again like somewhere in the 13th or 14th year. Do you remember this? The first, the Yerushalmi asked the question. Remember, if you have a chatzer in Jerusalem where you eat toda, todas are chametz. Remember, I still want to do a trip with all of us to the bakery over there. Joseph sent me there the first time, right? But we should do a class trip to the bakery. Have you been to the Beis Hamikdash bakery? It's great. You sent me there, Joe. It's awesome. Yeah. We should really do a class trip. Okay, maybe. Yeah, they make all that stuff. It's totally fun. Seidels. It's totally great. It's a great family trip. If you don't, we did it with our family. I'm happy to do it with you guys. Anyway, so if you have a place where you eat toda, so you know that you ate all the little crumbs. Why? You remember this is the Yerushalmi. Why do you know you ate all the little crumbs? Because you're not allowed to leave them over because it's notar, right? You're going to violate an issue, so you have to do bedikat chametz there. Umeshiv belokach in ambot kol mina notar. Klomer v'lo b'chol yom k'shochlim sham chalot toda v'kikin nazir Right, Nazir is also a chametz thing. Bodkin mashenotar v'sarfino token dichtiv v'sarftet anotar ba'esh. V'kevan shenivdak v'nisraf. Matzorach lebedika. No, what the heck would I be bika chametz in a house that I not in a house that I get told in? Umeshiv yeva. We can prove kahada tana Rabbi Zcharia chatnei de Rabbi Leva. Nida chofefet v'soreket. Kohenet ena chofefet soreket. Right, there says before you go to the mikvah. I don't know if you remember this example. Yeah, women comb their hair, etc. Clean themselves very well. But a kohenet doesn't have to. Why not? Nida kohenet chofefet soreket shelo lachlok benida benida. Or it's kohen, right? Or it's every nida. Or it's even if she took a shower, she still has to do it again. Why does she have to do it again? Because we don't want to differentiate between nida and nida. So to hachanami shelo lachlok ben biur lebiur. Lefichach or larbasar shu mechamedika chal chovat bediur biur levdok l'sheino lebaduk l'sheino baduk. So we explored. We talked about this comparison to nida. Not exactly the same thing, but says the Ravan, there's an independent chiyuv of bedika. Again, maybe it's a maridayin thing, lo lachlok ben. But the bottom line, there's a chiyuv to do your entire house, right? And that's actually quoted in Shulchan Aruch. If you happen to have swept your house or cleaned your house before, and you were certain that you didn't bring chametz in there, okay? You have to go through the house. Or that's the Marivav, you have to check all your things. However, the Magen Avram says something very interesting. He says, notwithstanding the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, he's not so happy about this. He says some people, once they check their whole house, they just take a couple of the rooms. They don't do. It's not good what they're doing. But he quotes the minhag. The minhag. Well, some people go into every room, but they just do a very chafif check. That's what we do, right? But he said some people just check a couple of the rooms.
There's no share.
So the question is, what's going on here, and how does this relate to Rabbi Zera? So again, what did Rabbi Zera say? Rabbi Zera said that we can differentiate between meat and bread. But the assumption is that in bread, we would, the inference is, in bread, if we knew it was eaten, you wouldn't have to check. That is in contrast to the Ravan, who says you still have to check. Now, to what extent you can check in according to the Ravan is a good question. Right? In other words, the Ravan says, just like Shalot Achlok Ben Nida Lenida, in other words, a woman who took a shower before, according to the Ravan, would go to the mikvah, she would still comb her hair. When she showered and she did everything, she would go to the mikvah, she would do it again. Because of some other woman who didn't do it. And we want everybody to have the same standard. Does that mean, is that like a Durabanan? Is that a Marid Ayin issue? Or is that some sort of fundamental issue? Not clear. Same thing here. When we say you'd have to do bedikat chametz again, is it just perfunctory? Because what's the basis of the chiyuv? Okay, so we don't know. There's not enough evidence in the Ravan, according at least the way I'm reading of the Ravan, to say he definitely requires everyone to do bedikat. And the Shulchan Aruch doesn't even start saying it. Doesn't say it's perfunctory. He says no, I don't give a damn if you checked out your house. You have to wash. You have to check your whole house again. So it sounds like there's a chiyuv bedikat. The question is, what's this position of the the Magen Avram that he quotes that everybody does? What's that based on? What's the svara for that? How could you check some of your rooms and not all of your rooms? That seems like a little contradictory, right? It seems like a little absurd, right? So Rav Aaron, this is like, again, the last gambit, so to speak, but I think it's very clever. Rav Aaron said this highlights something we've mentioned before, but he says maybe there are two dinim of bedikat chametz. One din of bedikat chametz. Again, this is the Magen Avram didn't like this thing. He also found it ridiculous. Right? Lo ye'otav. It's not good what they're doing, right? Rav Aaron said maybe there's two din. We've talked about this, but again, based on everything we know about bedikat chametz, this is a good way to end the year. He said maybe there's one chova bedika, and maybe there's another din, which is to make sure your house is purged of chametz, right? Something we mentioned a lot of times. In other words, there's a din if you want to call on the house or just on the chametz, but you want to make sure your house is a clean house because we want to go into Pesach, right? Remember, go into Pesach, not like that Rashi we saw that you do it on Pesach, or you do it later, or you do it in the afternoon. We want to get to the Korban Pesach. Remember, we talked about L'tochal chametz dam zivchi. We want to get there in a place where your house is purged of this object that's objectionable this time, right? So Rav Aaron said, if we really adopt it, there's two themes here, then I can explain the what the people do very well. You want to get to your house being purged of chametz, that you can do on the 13th or the 12th or the 11th. That's not a problem. But there's a chovat bedika. How do you accomplish the chovat bedika once you know there's no chametz in your house? Exactly. Do a minimum. Go to a couple of rooms. Right, you understand? There's a chovat bedika that's independent of purging your house of chametz. Usually, it comes in the other way. You do the bedika, and in that way, you purge your house of chametz. But against the Ravan, right? Again, the Ravan says no. There's still a chovat bedika that's zeh. But if you want to go against the Ravan, you could argue with him and say, hey, we can do the purging your house of chametz in one way by doing the bedika before, and then we could do the bedika by just doing a few rooms. No, so chatzer is still going to be a problem. How do we so chatzer becomes then a much more significant source when we know that there's no chametz there. Oh, you're asking why isn't there a chovat bedika on the chatzer? So then where you could distinguish, I didn't think about this before, but I think you could distinguish between the orev case in your chatzer, where there's no chova to purge your chatzer of chametz in the same way there is it's a din of the bayit, because bayit plays an important role in Pesach, because you could say it a lot of different ways. In other words, in your house, it's a different space. And that requirement was, even though in the chatzer you could trap down the orvim, but in your house, you'd be much less. If what I'm saying is right, then you'd have to distinguish between what if you saw a chulda bringing chametz into your chatzer. Right, I'm not sure I want to go that far. I think if you started going to your chatzer also, I think we do have responsibility to clean our chatzer road also, right?
Nobody does that.
You don't go outside to make sure. I don't know. Like we have barbecue. Do you check your barbecue to make sure you didn't leave some breadcrumbs there or something, or whatever?
Pretty big.
It should be a problem, right?
Right. In principle, it's in your. I mean, we talked about it at the beginning also. Yeah. I think you have to do it. The question is, but I think you might be able to draw distinctions here between these things as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a really good place to end in terms of just raising the big issues. Again, I think we covered a lot of the issues from the beginning till the end in terms of bedikat chametz, the source, the issue of purging your house, the chovat bedika. This source really highlights it in a very, very nice way to end the year. One thing I didn't get to mention today, I'll just remember today, was the thing that most entertained Joe over the course of the year was the question about Efshel levar, tzarich levar, right? It was, we spent a couple of 3 or 4 shiurim on that issue of to what extent do we have to check or can we just plead innocence or ignorance or naivete, whatever it is. So we talked about that. But this is the mitzvah d'Rabbanan, or maybe the Oraita, according to some Rishonim of bedikat chametz, that expresses itself here. And again, I think the main themes are the question of, is this nitkan al, again, I know I said it at the beginning, but I'll say it again. Was it nitkan al safek? Is this a chovat zman? Is it chametz? In the Beis Hamikdash, there was such a thing as chametz all year. But for us laymen out here, is this chametz, or is this just something else? And then all of a sudden, the 6th hour kicks in, and then it becomes a machal asurot. And then we spend a lot of time talking about, and the fact that after Pesach it goes back to being a regular thing. Well, that's pretty interesting also, right? That raises some questions. And then there's a question of, is it Amabai? Is there a chova bedika independent, which we saw today in the Ravan? That's one set of issues. The Efshel levar, tzarich levar, that was kind of our deviation for the year. And we also said that we had another deviation also about Birchat HaMitzvah and over Lasiyatan and the Rambam's famous Shita, make brachot afterwards. So that was also a big theme. So thank you again very much. This was a fun year. Unlike previous years, I actually have a thought about what I want to teach next year. So I'll throw it out there, and you can get back to me over the course of the summer if you think it's a good idea. But it should be a dictatorship. But if there's a lot of objection, no, because in general, us, the 7 or 8 of us, don't have as much time as we would like to learn Gemara. So there's a good opportunity to learn Gemara Be'iyun. So if I said that I want to take 1 year, something we've never done before, and learn Mishnah and Tarot, I want to learn Mishnah Yadayim with you, which is the issues of Netilat Yadayim. I know maybe it's Govel and Moed stuff, but I thought it might be just interesting to kind of explore how we learn Mishnah, like when there is no Gemara, and how it compares. And there are some Gemaras, like there's a whole 3 pages in Chulin that relate to it, so we won't do 10 pages of Gemara, we'll do 3 pages in Gemara. But I thought it might be interesting to kind of see how to do that and how the Rishonim, because we spend many years doing, we go over the same Rishonim, so I thought maybe it'd be interesting to explore that. So I'm interested in that, but if you're not interested, I'm open to going back to Nashim Nezikin. Like we usually do 1 year Nashim Nezikin and 1 year, I think that's what we've done in the past, but we can do Mishnah Yadayim next year. Because if I started you off on what is Mishnah Yadayim about, I know most of you wouldn't be able to answer that question, if any of you. Right. For what? Okay. Kachin, Chulin, Okay, so now that's the first year. Okay, so we can think about it. Okay, I'll think about it also to think if it's good. Okay, thank you very, very much. It's a lot of fun. No, the idea is to start, since Rosh Hashanah comes out on the 23rd. I checked this morning, so I was looking at the calendar. Rosh Hashanah comes out on the 23rd, so I think I'll be back from our summer break in the end of August. So I know, so hopefully, right, no, it's hopefully we can already start, we can have 2 or 3 shiurim before if we, I'd like to do that if possible.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.